Everyone, we are live on my channel. I'm Al, also known as Alan, and I have today Kay, also known as Kayla, who is very big on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is at Jace, and Catholic Twitter. You know, she's out there debating and pro-choice people and she is an ex-Mormon, so she's is in the Mormon state of Utah, and I just gotta say it's very exciting a live stream with someone in the same time zone as you. Like me, I'm in the Mountain time zone. It's like impossible to find someone in my time zone. But luckily this was a lot easier. So thanks. Yeah, and so Kayla, how are you?
Doing great, you know?
Yeah, and so we are here to talk about Mormonism because Kayla grew up a Mormon, and she has come home to the Catholic Church, the Church of Jesus Christ, not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So tell us, how did a good Utah Mormon girl like you end up in the Catholic Church?
Yeah, so, honestly, I didn't ever really have any doubts about Mormonism for almost my entire life. So up until I was about 18, which is pretty typical for being a Mormon. You hold to your faith very strongly, even if you don't necessarily have any evidence for it, like logical evidence. But it just so happened I ended up in this ethics and values class that the teacher started talking about the problem of evil. And I love debating. Anybody who follows my Twitter probably knows that. But so I just started talking to people about the problem of evil and the ways around it and what we could do about it. So obviously that it wasn't proof that God didn't exist. And so I started talking to my mom about it, and she referred me to my grandpa's article, which actually was originally a BYU speech. He was a professor at Brigham Young University, which is an LDS university, for 40 years. And he was actually an LDS apologist. And so I started reading through this, and he starts talking about all of the problems with classical theism and that God can't be actually omnipotent. He can't be, all powerful, all knowing, all of these things. And so that's how they get out of the problem of evil, is that God doesn't have those qualities, that he didn't create everything out of nothing. And so evil is actually not his fault. So I started reading this and I'm like, well, that doesn't really work. It didn't really click with me. And just the idea in general that, well, maybe God isn't who I thought he was. It just struck me as wrong. And so I kind of had this crisis of faith of whether or not God even existed, which was so weird for me because I'd always the Mormon church is true. The Book of Mormon is true. Everything that I know is true. And to have it all come crashing down so quickly, I ended up just kind of off the deep end, really. So in May of 2019, I actually was struggling a lot with depression, anxiety. I attempted suicide, and by a miracle, I'm alive. And so after this, I realized, logic or not, God had to exist because there was no scientific explanation. There was no sort of explanation you could give me for why I'm still here and why I'm actually fully functioning and completely fine. So I returned to the Mormon church and kind of just started studying, and my heart still wasn't in it. I still was having these kind of all of this cognitive dissonance going on. And so I kind of was at the point where I believed in God, but I just didn't have anywhere to go. I'd never met anybody who believed in God who wasn't LDS. I didn't have anybody to talk to. And I didn't know where to begin looking, because when you're a Mormon, you're taught that that is the one true church. you're taught that all these other faiths have fallen, that they don't hold what Christ held to, that they are corrupt, that they are terrible, and that the only place was Mormonism. And so I don't know why I still like clung to that, but I was thinking it was Mormonism or nothing, and it didn't really make any sense. And then I came across one of my friends who was talking about going to get a beer with his roommate. And I was like, you can't drink, you're a Mormon. Alcohol's a no-no. What are you doing? He goes, no, I'm not Mormon, I'm Catholic. I was like, Catholic? I'd never met a Catholic. And so we ended up talking about it clear into the night about the Trinity and all of these other things. And he left me with a book called The Case for Jesus by Brant Pitre. And
very good book, by the way. Very good book.
Yes.
In fact, Brant Pitre, you can read anything he's written. It's all brilliant, but that book especially.
Yes, so good. And I started reading through this, and like, Jesus claimed to be God. And that was actually the thing that struck me most, because I didn't know any of the arguments against the Gospels or them being anonymous. I didn't know any of that stuff. So that was all new to me. And I was like, oh, his arguments make sense. This is logical. But yeah, the thing that struck me most was that Jesus claimed to be God. And so after this, I just dove into Christianity, looking at different religions. I ended up going to a Catholic mass pretty early on. And I'd like to say that I wasn't a little bit biased by that, but I have to admit I was. I mean, they had a choir that was singing all in Latin, and it's this massive cathedral. You have to look up the Cathedral of the Madeleine. It's beautiful. And so just going into this, I was so shell-shocked because it's everything that's different from Mormonism. I mean, I used to think that the Mormon temple was pretty beautiful. You step into a cathedral and that's just not true. But it was just so logical. There was like people like St. Thomas Aquinas, where you're reading him and you're like, this makes sense. This isn't just me having some sort of feeling towards the Book of Mormon or some feeling towards some spiritual experience that I had. It was actual facts and logic that lined up and led me towards Catholicism. So yeah, I was baptized last year. My little baby was baptized last year. So that's how I became a Catholic.
So just a point of clarification here. So was it kind of like one weekend you're going to your Mormon church and the next weekend you're going to mass, and is it kind of like that, or was it more of a slow transition?
Yeah, so it was literally because I was still attending the Mormon church with my parents, but I was also attending Catholic Mass, and so I think a couple weeks into it, I had this brand new RSV Catholic Bible with all the icons on the front of it that I was bringing to the Mormon church and being like, this isn't true. Like this is what's true. So
Wow.
it was pretty quick as far as me accepting Catholicism because the logic of it. Yeah, it took me a long time to get baptized, but.
So I'm going to ask you a question that the whole audience may not know, but I know you'll know this. Do you still remember your testimony?
Oh, yes. My little Mormon testimony that's like, I know the church is true. I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet. I know that God speaks to his prophets today. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, because I know every Mormon is supposed to have a testimony, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so like each time I come across like some LDS missionaries, I'm like, I want to hear your testimony. Like,
yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I in fact have it written down in one of my old journals, my like testimony that I wrote down in seminary.
So explain to my audience what seminary is.
Yeah, so seminary is religious classes that you go to during high school. So instead of having a math class for one block, you'd have your seminary class where you'd walk across campus. The LDS Church would own buildings right next to the high schools, at least here in Utah. That's what they do. In other places, they typically go to somebody's house at like 5 a.m., but they have religious classes. And so 1 year it will be the Book of Mormon. 1 year you'll go over the New Testament, 1 year the Old Testament, and 1 year Doctrine and Covenants. So it's 4 years, freshman through senior.
Okay. Okay. This kind of feeds into my next question. So, as a Catholic, what's the religious life as a Catholic? It's a person who prays the rosary, prays before meals, abstains from meat on Fridays, goes to mass on Sunday, read the lives of the saints, read the catechism. Now, that's the life of a Catholic. Well, what's the life of a Mormon, a practicing Mormon?
Yeah, so that would typically look like on Sunday, you have 2-hour church. So you would go to church on Sunday, and then on Monday, typically that's when Mormons do family home evening. And so that night, you're supposed to get together with your family. Normally, some people do like a little lesson. So they'll have one of the kids or the parents prepare a little lesson about the gospel. And then normally they'll do an activity as a family. And then every day, the prophets, the like LDS prophets recently have been very outspoken about reading the Book of Mormon every day. So even if you're not reading like the Bible, it's not necessarily the scriptures. Like they say, read the Book of Mormon every single day. Other than that, if you're a teenager, you're going to, on Wednesdays or Thursdays is normally where it is. They have what's called mutual. And that's where you get together with a youth group. And it's normally segregated by gender. And so like I had young women's, we'd get together and do some sort of activity. I always tried to convince them to play basketball, but they didn't want to do that.
Nice. I love basketball. So
yeah. And
so
then, yeah.
like activities, is it just sports, or do you like go see a movie or something like that? Or
it can be any of those things. So they're like at one point I was in the presidency. So typically most Mormons have what they call callings. So you serve in some part of the church, right? So laymen can basically, they become bishops, right? They're over their ward, which is essentially kind of like a parish. And then some people are called to teach primary children. So those are young children under the age of 12. Some people are called to teach young women's, which is girls 12 to 18. What other callings? Some people are called to teach nursery. So you babysit kids during the second part of church. There's a whole bunch. So most Mormons serve in callings. When I was 14, I was the Maya Maid president. And so that means I got to like plan all the activities. They also had little manuals for us. And so the church would release these things. This was called personal progress, which you had to do like little things. So say there's like 20 activities in this little booklet, you had to do like 12 of them. And then once you got those checked off, through all of your personal progress, they'd give you like this little necklace that only certain people can buy from Deseret Book. This is all like very Mormon lingo.
Well, it's very club-like. It's like
yeah.
Oh, okay. So, question: what is the difference between a ward and a stake?
Yeah, so a ward would be like a parish, a stake would kind of be like a diocese. So a ward is what you go to every Sunday. It's normally in Utah. It's a group from probably about 200 people. And they have little boundaries. So everywhere has maps. And if you live in a certain place, you're in this certain ward. And that's where you have callings. A stake is made up of multiple wards. And so sometimes there will be like stake conference where all the wards get together and have the church meeting one Sunday.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that because I thought like a church you'd go to on Sunday was a stake. I thought that was a stake, but that's incorrect. That's a ward. The stake is like kind of like a equivalent of a diocese. Okay. So have you ever been inside a temple?
Yes, multiple times.
Okay.
Lots.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was kind of a dumb question, but no, because the temple actually, like for example, on the thumbnail of this thing, I took a picture of the temple in my city in Calgary. That's the city I live. It's temple number 140. Like they number them in order they're created. In my hometown of Edmonton, the number is 67. But if you go to southern Alberta, if you go to 2 hours south of here, in Cardston, it's temple number 6. It's one of the earliest temples of Mormonism. So, I'm curious, have you ever been in the celestial room?
Yes, I was actually sealed to my family when I was 9. And so anytime you have a sealing, or you can like walk through the temples before they're dedicated. So I've been in the celestial room a couple times.
Okay, I'm curious, does sealing happen in the celestial room, or do they have separate rooms? I thought they had separate rooms for sealing.
Yep. So they have separate rooms called sealing rooms where there's that little altar and a bunch of chairs. And then once you're sealed, you go into the celestial room, or once you're done with an endowment or something else, you go into the celestial room. So it's kind of like a little after party thing, I guess.
And what goes on in the celestial room?
You know, from what I remember of it, it was just kind of quiet. Me and my family were talking, but I think in every temple, at least the temples that I've been in, there's 2 mirrors that face each other. And it's supposed to represent like that your family is forever. And so the 2 mirrors, like they make that all the way back. But yeah, it's just a bunch of chairs, like nice furniture, nice, what are they called? I can't think of it. Anyway, like the lights, they have these big, chandeliers. They have these like massive chandeliers. And you just sit there. Like nobody does anything in there.
When they inaugurate like the temple in my city, it was opened in, I think, 2012. I had just moved in here. This like a month after it, but they had tours of the temple before they consecrated it. So like we had to put like plastic over our shoes, and no, we got to see sealing rooms, the celestial rooms, the baptism room. It was it was interesting, and like the the tour was with a husband and wife, and they're like, oh, we were sealed in a room like this, and like it was interesting. I'm glad I saw it. There's only a couple of weeks where you could go, but I drove down there a bit earlier this week, and I took the picture at lunch hour. So yeah, that's the thumbnail on there. But okay, now I think all Mormons, they read from something called the triple. Explain what that is.
I think it's actually normally a quad.
Well, yeah, I think there's a triple and a quad. A quad just has the Bible attached, right?
Yep. So Mormons have extra scripture besides the Bible. So they have the Book of Mormon, which is something Joseph claimed to translate from ancient America, Christians in ancient America. And then they have the Doctrine and Covenants, which it was, most of it is revelation from God to Joseph Smith while he was alive. I don't know if a couple other prophets, there's some at the end that's not Joseph, but that's revelation, mostly from God to Joseph. And then there's the Pearl of Great Price, which has Joseph Smith history, which is just kind of an overview of mostly how the church came to be, kind of how Joseph Smith grew up. They have the Book of Abraham, which is another thing that Joseph Smith claimed to translate from Egyptian papyri. And then they have the Book of Moses. Also, they don't know much about the translation process on that one. But yeah, lots of extra books.
Translation process, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, because back in about 2010, I kind of wanted to learn about Mormonism, so I went on the Deseret website. I bought a triple. I tried to read the Book of Mormon. I didn't finish it. I got about a third of the way through. I read the Doctrine and Covenants and the Book of Abraham, and then I bought a pack of 4 books. I remember it cost $17. And this pack of 4 books is like a missionary pack. So if you're like a missionary, like your family's supposed to buy it for you. And I also found this older book, A Marvelous Work and a Wonder. I read that one just to try to get a feel for what they believe. And it's kind of like, it's a bit off.
Just a bit.
Just a bit, you know. What are the Kinderhook plates?
Yeah, the Kinderhook plates, they were made by a couple of men who were trying to essentially prove that Joseph Smith wasn't a prophet and that he didn't have any ability to translate. So they had these little bell-shaped plates brought to Joseph Smith, and when they were presented to him, he was like, oh yeah, these are, this is Greek, and I want to look into buying these. Mormons get around that because they were just gibberish. They weren't anything. But Mormons get around that mostly by saying that he never translated them. So we don't actually have proof, that it was a joke or he can't translate. But yeah, that'd be like me bringing my daughter's drawings to you, Al, and you saying that's ancient Greek. Be a little suspicious.
Yeah, you'd probably question my claims to prophethood after that. I mean, oh, Joseph. Yeah, no, that's, yeah. True or false question. Mormons don't believe in gods. They believe in superheroes.
Oh no, true or false? That's my only option.
You can qualify.
I like to joke with my husband that, yeah, they believe, how atheists a lot of the time will come at you and say, oh, your little sky daddy. That's Mormons for you. The little guy up in the sky with flesh and bones has a dad and you're his son. But yeah, they don't believe in God in any sense that like a classical theist would believe in God in any way. Basically just a guy with superpowers.
Superheroes. Gotcha.
Yes.
I love that analogy. A friend of mine made that, although he does not want credit for it. So I'm not going to say. I'll tell you after the stream who said it if you don't know. But, so Smith never got to Utah, right? They went to Utah after Smith was killed.
Yes.
The Mormons, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, as soon as he died, Mormons split into two. There's 2 churches, right? There's like the Mormon church in Utah, then there's the Community of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so explain that a bit.
Yeah, so after Joseph Smith died, they actually had an issue with who the next prophet was going to be. So Emma Smith, who was Joseph Smith's first wife, she thought that her son should be the next prophet because he was Joseph Smith's son. And then others were looking to Brigham Young, who was a leader in the church already, and one of the counselors for Joseph Smith, which is like the second highest position that you can be. And so after this point, there was a time when Brigham Young was actually giving a speech, and there's claims that his voice actually changed into the voice of Joseph Smith while he was speaking, and that's how they know that he was supposed to be the prophet over Joseph Smith's son. I don't know a whole lot about the Community of Christ, but I know that that's where the split began, is over who should be the next prophet, Emma's son or Brigham Young, and the mainstream LDS church obviously goes towards Brigham Young.
Okay, so yeah, and like that's the group that eventually moved out west to Utah and the surrounding states.
Yep.
It's kind of interesting because I think the Mormon Church outlaws polygamy in like 1890, right? And like that's why Utah took so long to become a state. Like if you take a look at maps, it's a territory forever until they finally decide not to do polygamy. That's okay. We'll make you a state now.
Yep.
So now explain to us the. I think it's got a few names, but I think it's normally the plan of salvation. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
I wish I had drawn it for you. They made me draw it all the time.
Oh.
So basically, you start with the pre-existence. So Mormons believe that we all existed in basically a spirit world before we were born. So our heavenly parents had these spirit children, and that's the pre-existence. I'm sure you know this, but they believe that the war in heaven wasn't really between the angels. It was actually between all of us, and that 1/3 of us decided not to go with Christ, and they are in outer darkness. They'll never have a body. The rest of us, the next step is birth. And so we get onto this earth, and then after earth, so after death, there's this kind of, I always think it's interesting because it's kind of like purgatory to me, but not really. So there's spirit prison and there's spirit paradise in this place after earth. And the people who are baptized and were good, at least if you're baptized, you're in spirit paradise. And then there's spirit prison for the people who aren't baptized, where Christ and these other people in spirit paradise are teaching them, so they can eventually be ready to accept their baptism when somebody accomplishes that for them on earth. And then they have the resurrection. And after the resurrection, there's a 1,000-year period called the millennium, where they believe that we'll be doing temple work. So we'll be baptizing people and doing other things. And then there's judgment. And then there's 3 different kingdoms. So there's the celestial, terrestrial, and telestial kingdoms. And there's 3 degrees of glory in the celestial kingdom. So essentially, if you're like the best of the best, you're married, because you have to be married to get to the highest degree of heaven. You go to the 3rd degree of the celestial kingdom. If you're a murderer and you're terrible, as long as you didn't deny the Holy Spirit after you knew God, you go to the telestial kingdom, which Joseph Smith actually said he had a vision of, and that it was like paradise beyond what he could have ever imagined. So that's where murderers go. And nobody really knows like what gets you into the other kingdoms. Like maybe if you're a good person, but you weren't baptized, you go to terrestrial. There's not a lot of knowledge about that, besides as long as you're married, you were righteous, you go to this 3rd degree of heaven. If you were unmarried, you still go to the celestial kingdom. But in the Doctrine and Covenants, it actually calls you a servant. So.
Well, I mean, if we don't know what those 2 other kingdoms look like, I guess it's unfortunate that God didn't give Joseph a vision of those 2 other kingdoms. And of Victoria, that's not Origenism. That's like massive Origenism on steroids to the nth degree. Like I know what Originism is, and it's kind of weird, but like this is completely blows that out of the water. No chance.
Yep.
Hold on. I'm gonna put you in. I'm gonna put you in a timeout. Salam, please leave unless you want to pay attention. Don't try to put names of Islamic apologists in the chat. All right. Yeah. So yeah. No. That's interesting. The plan of salvation. And okay. So in 2015, I think it was 2015. It might be a couple years after. I'm kind of having a foggy memory here. There was something called the CES letter. Explain the C. Well, did you hear about that while you were still a Mormon?
So I didn't hear about the CES letter until after I was Mormon.
Or Catholic?
You're talking about mentioning it without mentioning it. One sec. There's a balloon going into my ceiling fan.
Oh, cool.
Sorry, my daughter just turned 1. Yeah, that we in seminary, so those religious classes, they would kind of mention anti-Mormon literature and things that you could look up on the internet. And you could tell there was a big boom in people doing that during the time of the CES letter because it got brought up a lot more, but they never would mention it by name. The CES letter is this letter that was written by a man. He actually, so I'm trying to remember what CES stands for, but it's essentially what? Yeah, it's the church education system. So that's who runs seminary. An institute is the same thing as seminary. It's just for college students. There was a man who had all these questions about Mormonism, and he was trying to figure them out, like honest to goodness, trying to understand how to answer these, if Mormonism was true. And so he sent this letter with all these questions and these problems to the CES director, trying to get them answered. And nothing. Like nobody ever tried to help him. And so he ended up publishing it on the internet for people to read. And Mormonism took a hard hit after that, because I mean, a lot of the things in there were just not anything anybody had ever heard before, because Mormons aren't really taught apologetics. They're not taught, here's the problems with your religion. You know, they're only taught
they're taught the testimony instead of apologetics.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I didn't learn about it until actually much after I started converting to Catholicism, because I started reading The Case for Jesus, right? And then I started like watching YouTube videos, reading the Bible. I decided to read it like cover to cover again. And then it was actually later, after I'd found out even some more of these things about Mormonism, that I found out about the CES letter, which I always think is kind of funny, because a lot of Mormons that I get into contact with are like, did you read the CES letter? The CES letter's dumb. Like, you shouldn't have lost your testimony of the CES letter. I'm like, no, I lost my testimony over an article about the problem of evil, but okay.
and Brent Petrie's book.
Yes. He'll do that to you. Mormons beware.
Mormons beware. So I'm curious, since converting, have you know any Mormons who have read Brent Petrie's book?
I don't. I don't know. So I don't know a lot of my, like, most of the Mormons that I am in contact with are not Mormons willing to search out other religions. So I meet some online who are more intellectual about things. But most of the Mormons, like, I think I tried to get my mom to read, I think I was trying to get her to read that book, and I was trying to get her to read another one. And like, you cannot get them to read those things, even if they're not about their religion. But I don't know another Mormon that has.
Oh, that's a shame. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I think that book is amazing. Not just for Mormons, but for atheists, for Muslims. I don't know if you know, there's this former Christian professor named Bart Ehrman
Yes.
who writes all these. I got like 10 of his books over there. He writes all these apostate books, and the Muslims just like accept him uncritically, and the atheists just accept him uncritically, and he's their guy. So it's not like I enjoy reading this stuff, but I deal with these people, so I have to know what it reads. And that book is a really good answer to a lot of the nonsense that Bart Ehrman is speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I'm curious, are there a lot of Catholics in Utah?
You know, if there are a lot of them, I don't know them.
Oh,
There's typically when I go to a parish, it's full, right? So like the St. George church that I go to now, when I go there, there's an overflow into the gym. So they're full, but there's not a lot of them. Which is kind of sad.
Okay, so the Catholic church you go to, there's not a lot of ex-Mormons. It's mainly people that have moved from out of state for one reason or another. Okay.
Yeah,
okay. Like, are they like of Hispanic background?
Yeah.
Okay.
It depends which part of Utah you go to, but.
Okay. Yeah. Because I mean, let's face it. I mean, Mormons are good people. Like I want them on our side. And like most false religions out there, when people leave them, they just, they become like agnostic and live like a hedonistic life. And I don't want that. It's like, look, you want, like back when these people were pure believers in Mormonism, they were right in the sense that they know there's something more out there. They know Jesus is important, but they just kind of got thrown some bad stuff, and like after that, it's probably like pretty much everything else is probably just as bogus. I'm not gonna look. So, and yeah, that's such a shame because they got really good values. I want them on our side in terms of faith. So a question here. My parents actually passed through town today on their way to the mountains, and I told them I was going to be talking with a Mormon if they had any questions. And this one comes from my dad, good old Papa Rule. How do the Mormons stay so tight and keep so many of their members?
I don't know about keeping their members.
Yeah, now I told him that's probably not as true in 2021 than it was when he was a kid, like the Mormons he knew growing up. But like it's still
very knit.
Yeah, so like it's not as true as it once was, but they still retain a lot. So like and how exactly do they do that?
Yeah. So I think it has a lot to do with they have very, very strong communities. So everyone is involved, right? So like I can go to my Catholic church now and nobody knows my name, even though I like show up there every Sunday. And a lot of Catholic churches are like that, right? Where the priest is the one that, everybody knows, and like the deacons, and maybe, the altar servers, or, the people who come to the rosaries that they do on Thursday, but you don't have to do any of those things. Whereas in Mormonism, most of the time you're expected to have a calling, right? You're expected to be participating, especially when you're young. So especially between the years of 12 to 18, you're going to Mutual, you're going on Sundays to these things. In the summers, you're going to Boy Scout camp with your ward, or you're going to girls camp with all the people, all the young women from your stake. And so these, like, they're your friend group. They're the people that you're with all the time. And also, I think a lot of it has to do with, also they have home teachers and visiting teachers. And so everyone in the ward is assigned to go and visit people during the week. So if you're a home teacher, that's a priesthood holder. Normally 2 priesthood holders are assigned to go to a family's house and give them a lesson every Sunday or once a month. And then visiting teachers are a group of 2 women that will come and visit other women in the ward and make sure that they have everything that they need. Yes, you need Papa Rule. I like that you call him Papa. Yeah, so everything about the structure of the church is ingrained towards, these are the people that you are always with. You're always doing these kind of things together. So your faith is reliant on these other people. This is your social circle. So it's not just like the Catholic Church where I can go and, I can have my atheist friends, and then I go to Catholic Church on Sunday and nobody knows my name. Like in Mormonism, you know everybody's name. You have a calling. You're constantly participating in some way in this social aspect to religious life.
Yeah, so that probably gives you like a lot more motivation to stay involved. Like for example, if you live like say in Salt Lake City, that's like through friends. I've gotten a very good job through friends before. Like my first job in this city, a friend gave my resume to someone. That's the whole reason I moved to this city. Like, and so like to have a very tightly knit community who would probably do that. I assume that happens. They help them find jobs and stuff and things like that. Like that's if you apostatize from Mormonism, you lose that network of friends and yeah. So yeah, that kind of makes sense, like, and I'm curious, of all the ex-Mormons out there, do some become evangelical Protestants too, or?
Yes, I'm aware of several people who have gone to evangelicalism. My husband being one of them. When he left the church originally, he went and was a Protestant for a while before he found Catholicism.
Oh, okay.
That's more typical than being a Catholic for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, Catholics, sadly, at least in America and Canada as well, we've completely lost our missionary spirit. It's really depressing, and hopefully we change it around. Like we're like ashamed if we proselytize. Ooh, we all have our own beliefs. Like that's how I grew up.
Yeah.
That's how I grew up, and I'm like, wait, this is BS. I'm going to preach to people now. So yeah, so like they're constantly probably like preaching at the Mormons trying to get them, whereas the local Catholic church is kind of like, you can come here if you want, but we're not going to tell you.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is you'll see Protestants, like Mormons have this thing called General Conference, which is twice a year. They have this big thing where most of the like higher ups in the church will come and speak for a couple of days. And the last time, because me and my husband just went to walk down there to see, what was going on with it. There's Protestants, with signs, and there's Protestants who are trying to talk to Mormons. And I've never seen a Catholic down there. I've never seen a Mormon try to talk to them. My husband actually started talking to them, which is pretty funny. But yeah, Catholics could definitely step that up.
Yeah, we're pretty pathetic when it comes to recently in our history. Like throughout our church, we've been very missionary oriented, but yeah, things have not been well for us the last half century. Oh well, that's that's why that's why I'm online. That's why you're online, right? You know. All right. But the vast majority of ex-Mormons probably just kind of lapse into being nominal and secular, and that, yeah, that's unfortunate. And you mentioned at your church that like the church you go to right now is that there's not a lot of ex-Mormons there.
Not that I'm aware of. So I honestly, since moving down here, we haven't been as involved as we'd like to be because of our schedule. The parish that we were going to before, I'm trying to think. There was probably roughly around 150 people who went there, and I knew of two ex-Mormons besides me and my husband, so 4 total that were there.
Wow. So, do you attend Latin Mass?
I used to. I don't have access to one right now.
Is that because of Pope Francis's thing, or is that because you moved?
It's because I moved. So I think we're still waiting on my bishop's decision, actually, for the Latin Mass that we used to go to, which hopefully we're moving back up there eventually. And hopefully that I know he approved of it before, so hopefully he'll keep approving it. So if you guys could keep us in your prayers, we'd appreciate it. Yeah, the nearest one to here is 2.5 hours.
Yeah, probably a bit too far from a drive. Like,
If I didn't have a 1-year-old, I would probably go.
oh.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we get the Latin Mass more available everywhere. I know there's some restrictions, but I still see room for growth, even with Pope Francis's recent motu proprio. And yeah, like I think it's a great evangelization tool. When like I think if a lot of LDS came with that, yeah, like I think that would be good. I'm curious, those two other former LDS in your church, did they have a similar story to yours, or?
So I don't know one of their stories very well. The other one, he actually is kind of similar to my husband's. He grew up with one, I think his father was Protestant and his mother was Mormon. And so he grew up Mormon, but then he ended up moving to Protestantism. And then he was kind of like my husband, where he started researching things and became a Catholic once he started reading the church fathers and early church history.
Yeah, that'll happen once you read the church fathers. It's like, well, you know, the 16th century, things existed before that, and it was actually pretty darn good, you know.
Yeah.
You want to answer this question since you're a convert?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so in my experience, the first Mass that I attended actually wasn't a traditional Latin Mass, but the choir was singing in Latin. And I think it's just something so different and beautiful that when you're kind of used to this one thing, right? So like in Mormonism or in most Protestant churches, it's kind of just someone preaching at you for an hour and then you sing here and there, and that's church. And some Novus Ordos kind of are like that, right? You go to church and you have some singing, and then you have a homily. And there's nothing really different about that part of the Mass. Obviously, the Eucharist is different in every Mass. But when you go to the TLM, everything is kind of a shell shock to you, right? Because everything's in Latin. There's normally this different type of music. There's normally much more incense. There's normally much more reverence. So I think a lot of it has to do with the shell shock of, well, I've known this thing my whole life. So when you bring me this thing, this is what I already had. Whereas when you go and you have this beautiful Latin Mass, it's something completely different, something you've never experienced before, and it's beautiful. It's so much more beautiful than a Protestant church or a Mormon church.
I keep a diary every day. Like, if you can see here, this is my diaries for over 10 years.
No.
And I still remember the first day I went to Latin Mass. It was actually in my hometown. It was like a month before I moved here. Like, I was at a wedding, a Catholic wedding in my hometown. And there's this one girl I'm talking to. I asked her what church she goes to. She's like, I go to this church. It's like I tried to go for the mass at 8 a.m. because at 8 a.m. it's in Latin. If I sleep in, I got to go to English. I'm like, Latin? I'm like, oh, that church isn't too far from my house. I'm going to check that out. And then I went, and then I moved down to my current city. I sought out the Latin Mass, and yeah, like, I only go to Novus Ordo if I don't have Latin Mass. If I don't have Latin Mass, I'll try to go for an Eastern Rite, because my mom's actually Ukrainian Catholic. So, yeah. So, yeah. So, are there any more questions? Let's get the questions coming. We can do that now. Questions about Mormonism, Latin Mass, Utah. Yeah. I've got a question for you here. Were you ever a missionary?
No, I was actually so there's this thing called missionary prep, which are these classes that you can take before becoming a missionary. And I had talked to my bishop about putting papers right before all of this happened. So luckily I never went.
Right before you read Petrie's book, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
From Victoria. Is she involved in apologetics with Mormons in Utah?
Yeah, so honestly, not really. So I am actually kind of a shy person, kind of reserved. I don't know if I come across that way, especially online, which is why I try to do more online things. And actually, a lot of the stuff I do is more geared towards keeping Catholics and other Christians away from Mormonism. That is trying to get Mormons to become Catholic. It's a really hard thing to do, to get Mormons to just drop their faith. So something like I would recommend with Mormons who are very attached to their faith is actually not attacking it at all. For the most part, like, become friends first. Definitely. Like, if you have an interest in converting somebody, definitely get to know them, and definitely talk about everything you love about Catholicism. So talk about your rosary, talk about your patron saint, talk about everything that's great about Catholicism. Because if you just start talking to most Mormons and your first words out of your mouth is Joseph Smith is a liar, they're never going to talk to you ever.
Yeah, that wall comes up, and it's kind of it. I mean, it's kind of from a Catholic point of view. If like an evangelical person comes up to you and says, "You guys believe, you guys worship Mary, you can earn your way to heaven, you can do like all these shallow misinterpretations of our faith that shows they have not actually studied our faith." Like, a thing I've noticed, and it actually fits in, like, if talking to a Mormon or a Muslim or someone else, you can show that you've read their stuff. Like, they really have a lot more respect for you then. Like, if I didn't complete the Book of Mormon, but like, I normally tell them I read A Marvelous Work and a Wonder by Legrand Richards. They're like, "Oh, that's awesome. What do you think of it?" And it kind of gives me an avenue in. Like, not that I respect their faith, but I respect them as people, and I'm not going to try to convert them without I'm not going to be the angry street preacher, if you know what I mean, or a slightly less obnoxious version of. Very important question here. What are the influences of Freemasonry on Mormonism, if any? Well, take it away, Kayla.
Yeah, so actually, most of the early leaders of the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, were Freemasons. So they were very involved with Freemasonry. Joseph Smith was a Freemason. It's actually pretty clear that his last words were a call to get Freemasons to help him and to not kill him. So most of what you'll see that reflected in today in the Mormon Church is in their temple ceremony, which I actually never went through this part of the temple, but there's something called an initiatory and an endowment, which they have the little handshakes. They call them coins and tokens that get you into heaven. They have these circles that they go around and like chanting. So the Mormon temple ceremony is very parallel to what happens in Masonic lodges. And there are a lot of influences because Joseph himself was a Freemason with the temple ceremony and Mormonism. So that's most of where you'll see it reflected today. If you look back into early Mormonism, there's a lot more that you'll find with Joseph Smith and Brigham Young being Freemasons.
Yeah, and like I heard once, you corrected me on this, but I heard once a theory that the people that killed Smith were Freemasons who was mad that he was stealing their stuff, like the ceremonies, temples. But you told me it's in fact a group of people who he burned down their printing press or something.
Yes. So there was a printing press that was going to publish a story basically on Joseph's polygamy and his young wives. And he had it burned down, essentially. And a lot of these people, I mean, he sent several men on missions to Europe and to other places, and then took their wives as his wives. So he had a lot of people very unhappy with him. But a lot of the reason was burning down that printing press.
Okay, and they're the ones who broke into the jail and finished them off. And if I understand correctly, he was also running for president as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't mind, just talk for 30 seconds to my audience. You can tell them I got to go get something.
Oh, okay. I don't know what to say. I think Luis, I saw him in the chat saying Kwaku versus Kayla debate win. That will never happen, Luis. Never, ever. And the big reason is I think that most Mormon apologists are, first of all, I'm not qualified. Not in any way. Like, I am not qualified to do any of that stuff. But second of all, a lot of Mormon apologists that you'll find are like very dishonest. So I think the last debate that Kwaku was in, he was arguing with an evangelical and trying to say that he believes that some Jewish girl is in hell and all of these things, and he's abused that. And I don't want to debate or share a stage with somebody who does dishonest things and like paints people as evil just because they're part of a different religion. There's no need.
Okay. Question from Jared. Is Mormonism growing, shrinking, or staying the same? They're building a brand new Mormon temple, not sure the name, right near my house. I live in Manitoba, Canada. So for Americans, Manitoba is straight north of Grand Forks. If you go to Grand Forks, North Dakota, and drive straight north, you'll get to Manitoba. It's a prairie province. In fact, the same accent in Minnesota goes up into Manitoba. So the nice Minnesota accent, just we got it too, it's Manitoba, but yeah. So yeah, is it shrinking, growing, stagnant?
So the big thing with Mormonism, it's growing a lot in third world countries. So they have a lot of really successful missionaries in like South America. I don't know how well they do in Africa. But yeah, third world countries, I would say their membership is growing. You go to places that are more secular, like America or Europe, Mormonism is not growing. It's definitely shrinking. And due to the internet and a lot of people being able to access more things about Mormonism,
CES letter.
yeah, the CES letter is a big one. That is shrinking a lot of their membership. But at the same time, the Mormon church is very, very rich. There's some investment account that they came out a couple years ago that has like $100 billion in it. And there was outrage about that. But so they're building temples. As far as buildings go, they're definitely growing. As far as people go, I haven't looked at the numbers. I'm pretty sure they're declining.
Yeah. So so I just left my room to go to one of my bookshelves, and I got this book. Have you read this book?
I was actually, yeah, I am in the middle of reading it.
Are you? Oh, so is this one of the better biographies of Smith? Because like say someone out there wants to learn about Joseph Smith from kind of like a neutral, like not super prophet for sure, but not the most evil man who ever lived. Like a nice balanced biography. Is there one you recommend? Is it this one? Is it another one? Or
so Rough Stone Rolling is a really good one if you're going to, because the author of that book is still a believing Mormon. So that's kind of more a safe one if you're trying to dialogue with Mormons. Referring to that book isn't necessarily anti-Mormon literature. If you're just looking for a really good biography in general, this book is really good. I don't know if you can see it. There's kind of a glare. An Insider's View of Mormon Origins. That's Grant Palmer. That's a really good book. If you're looking for an interesting read, this is an older copy. I couldn't find a newer one. But No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brody is a very good read. I would say there's a lot of Mormons who will argue with you about this one. So if you're going for more unbiased, this is the one to go to. An Insider's View of Mormon Origins. If you're just looking for an interesting read that'll get you started on Mormon stuff, I definitely recommend this. Especially if you don't like to read it. This is a great book.
What year was that book written?
Oh, let me open it.
Like approximately. Like, was that written after he died?
Yeah, it was written after he died. What are you saying? 1840? 1940. This one was written in 1940. This copy is from 1963. But yeah, copyright 1945. This is my grandfather's old copy, actually. It's pretty interesting to go through because he always put notes in his book. And so he'll like nitpick about what she's saying. It's like very, very nitpicky. Things go after Fawn Brody, but that's a really good book, and she writes very well.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's it. So like Fawn Brody. So like is Fawn Brody like trying to attack Joseph Smith, or is it just kind of neutral? Like,
so she's accused of being an anti-Mormon, attacking Joseph Smith. But honestly, I don't get that from her writing. I get it from somebody. This is somebody telling a story that obviously doesn't believe it. Obviously is coming from not necessarily a critical perspective. I would consider her more objective. But if a Mormon's going to read it, they're going to consider it insanely critical. Whereas rough stone rolling, they might be a little bit nicer, but most of them have the same content. It mostly has to do with who Mormons perceive the authors to be.
Okay, and is Fawn Brody an ex-Mormon?
No. Oh, she is. Sorry, my husband's like sitting right there. Yeah, she's an ex-Mormon.
Okay, and so like, okay, are there some more biographies besides this, and Fawn?
Yeah, so Grant Palmer's I wouldn't say it's a complete biography. It's kind of just like an early history with Joseph Smith.
What's the one that the Mormons want you to read? Like, if
Rolling.
that's one they want you to read.
Yes.
Well, like, of all the biographies out there, like all the ones that were published.
So all of the ones that were published, they would actually probably want you to read like The Life of Joseph Smith, by George Q. Cannon. There's a lot of biographies that the church has put out. So they've put out recently this like volume. I think they're called Saints. Those all come from like the opposite end, right? So those are all very pro Joseph Smith. I wouldn't consider them objective in any way, especially The Life of Joseph Smith by George Q. Cannon. He makes him out to be very much like a great guy, a hero. If you're looking for something that's going to give you the facts that Mormons aren't going to shy away from, Rough Stone Rolling is your best one to go to.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, this is, yeah, because I actually did read this one back in the day, and it was a long time ago. It was back in my hometown. Like, it's not in my normal. It's not on my normal bookshelves. I got bookshelves over there. I had to go to the floor below me. But I'm curious. Are you in your room? Like, I know on the Catholic Hour, you're like, oh, there's all my books, and you had like these. That was so awesome.
Yeah, I'm not in that office right now. I actually just went through because like my husband made fun of me because he's like, they're my books, they're not your books. Which, to be fair, he has an awesome book collection. I actually just went through and like organized them all so they're not all in like the crazy stacks anymore. They're all like balanced off to the side, but he has a lot of books.
Okay, so he's an avid theology reader.
Mostly biblical scholarship.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Alan, why aren't you watching football game? Will beat you guys. Are you talking about the Olympics, Canada, like female soccer, Canada versus Brazil? Anyway, who has more books, Michael Lofton or the Richardsons? Lofton has a lot of books.
He probably has more. I would like the library. If he ever dies, I need to be his friend, and he can leave it to me in his will.
Yeah, I think I got more books in Lofton, but that includes everything, my novels and all that stuff. Yeah, I think I got Lofton beat. By the way, Lofton. No. I love Lofton. He's awesome. I think we're currently competing. I think they're live right now. So yeah. So okay. If you were run out of time, is there anything else you want to say? Do you got some final book recommendations? Yeah. Like apart from Smith biographies.
Yes. So just a couple of books. If you know anyone, this is a really good book. Jesus' Resurrection and Joseph's Visions, which essentially looks at the evidence for Christ's resurrection versus the evidence for what Joseph Smith was claiming. which is a really good book for ex-Mormons who are now agnostic or atheist. Because I think a lot of people just tend to lump all religions in together at that point. And this is a really good book to point people towards if you're saying, hey, if you really want to be logical about this, let me show you the differences. It does a really good job of highlighting that. So again, Jesus' resurrections and Joseph's visions.
Who's the author? Oh, Robert Bowman. He's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not Catholic, but sharp guy.
Mm-hmm. And then if you're looking to get into Mormon polemics or apologetics with Mormons, this is a good book to go to, The Mormon Defenders. So it's How Latter-day Saint Apologists Misinterpret the Bible, James Patrick Holding. Because there's a lot of things that, Mormons will do. Because if you're just the average Catholic, right, you might think that Mormons are easy targets until you meet the right Mormon, right?
Yeah, they can be slippery. If you don't know your stuff, if you completely go in, for me, I'd argue church history against them. Because I once I was talking to some Mormon. There's Mormon missionaries who live on my block. They live in this condo on my block, just 1 minute away. But I'm like, so how come we had to have Joseph Smith and come and restore the true Christian faith? He's like, have you heard of the Council of Nicaea? I'm like, yeah. It's like, because of that. I'm like, oh, but most Christians wouldn't know how to answer that. They're like, oh, I think I heard that once when I watched the Da Vinci Code or something like that. Yeah, no, it's sad. Oh, this is an interesting question here. How about biographies of Brigham Young? Let's face it, he was an interesting guy. Not a good guy, but an interesting guy.
Yeah, super. I honestly don't know of any, actually. A lot of people tend to not focus on Brigham Young for obvious reasons. He was kind of crazy. I think it's more interesting to just read what he said.
Well, he said that Adam was God the Father, right? But that's not believed anymore.
Yeah, and there's a lot of complicated things with that. There's a lot to his Adam God theory that was actually taught in the temple for a while. Yeah, there's so many things. If you read about the blood atonement, so he thought that certain sins weren't forgivable by Christ's atonement, so people had to pay for them with their lives.
I've heard of that, actually, yeah.
Yeah. I think there was one quote from him where he says that, if he found one of his wives with another man, that he would throw a javelin through their heart and then they could go to heaven. So he's
sounds like a charming guy, doesn't it?
He's actually my 9th great grandfather. I think a lot of Mormons are related to him. But yeah, honestly, I don't know of any. I'll have to look that up and get back to Lewis. But yeah, just look up quotes from Brigham Young. They're hilarious. They're super funny.
It's kind of like Dan Quayle quotes, but in terms of religion, Huh. Okay. All right. Have you got any final words for my audience?
Yeah, I think just reiterating, if you get into conversations with Mormons, a lot of their religion to them is just based on, their emotions and their feelings, and their what they call spiritual experiences. So I honestly think the best approach with them is to just talk about what you love about Catholicism. Talk about the experiences you've had with the Eucharist or adoration or with your rosary, and get them to pray it with you. I think that's most of the time the best approach, that if they end up ever leaving Mormonism, because it's going to be really hard to just straight up get them to leave, but at least they know that something else is there. Because I think a lot of Mormons turn to atheism, not because they don't believe in God anymore, but because they don't believe in Joseph Smith, but they don't know where God is. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, and like, of course, everyone knows Mormons that they're so nice, you know. So it's so like it's easy to talk with them, and try to respond with something equal to, so they know there's true goodness in other faiths. Because you know, I wish sometimes us Catholics would behave a bit better, but I guess no one's perfect. But yeah, no. So treat your Mormon friends with respect. Tell them how much you love your faith and the amazing things about your faith. Maybe one day they might come to Latin Mass with you. You know.
Yes.
All right, I am wrapping up here. I'm going to end the stream. Thank you so much, Kayla, for coming. And I I've got a link to her video with Gabriel Charles, where she goes through her whole conversion story. So she spends like an hour going on her own conversion story. So check that out too. That's a good video. And yeah, check this out. Go and pick up a Joseph Smith biography while you're at it, and pick up the Robert Bowman book and all those books she showed. And yeah, signing off, everyone. God bless.